The courtroom was suffocatingly quiet. The heavy wooden doors seemed to shut out the rest of the world, leaving only the cold, sterile reality of a broken family inside. For months, the custody battle between Arthur and Eleanor Vance had been the talk of the town. To the public, Arthur was a wealthy, charismatic businessman, a pillar of the community who promised his 9-year-old son, Leo, a life of luxury and endless opportunities. Eleanor, on the other hand, looked defeated, worn down by years of emotional abuse and a ruthless smear campaign orchestrated by Arthur's expensive lawyers. Judge Miller, a man with decades of experience, rubbed his temples. He looked at the paperwork, then at the wealthy father, and finally at the quiet, pale little boy sitting in the front row. To the judge, the choice seemed clear, even if it felt heavy. The mother had no stable income, no grand house, and a fragile emotional state. The father offered stability, wealth, and a pristine home. With a sharp strike of his gavel, Judge Miller pronounced his verdict. Full legal and physical custody of Leo Vance was awarded solely to his father. Arthur's face lit up with a triumphant, smug smile. He turned to his lawyers, shaking their hands, already celebrating his victory. Across the room, Eleanor buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent, heartbreaking sobs. She knew she had lost her only reason for living. Leo sat perfectly still. He didn't cry. He didn't smile. He just stared at the judge with wide, unnaturally calm eyes. Seeing the boy's intense gaze, Judge Miller softened his expression. He leaned forward over his high bench, looking down at the child with a gentle, reassuring smile. Leo, the judge said, his voice echoing softly in the quiet room. Do not worry, son. Your father loves you very much, and you are going to go live in a beautiful, big house. Everything is going to be all right now. Do you have anything you want to say to me before we close the case? The courtroom grew even quieter, waiting for the young boy's response. Leo stood up slowly, his small hands gripped the edge of the wooden railing. He didn't look at his father, nor did he look at his weeping mother. His eyes remained locked onto the judge. He cleared his throat, his innocent, high-pitched voice cutting through the heavy silence of the room. Mr. Judge, Leo asked, his face completely expressionless. As Dad won custody, who will the little sister in the freezer live with? The words hung in the air like a sudden drop in temperature. For a second, nobody moved. The celebratory smiles on the faces of Arthur and his legal team instantly froze. Judge Miller froze mid-motion, his pen hovering just millimeters above the final custody documents. He blinked, staring at the boy, wondering if he had misheard. What did you say, Leo? Judge Miller asked, his voice losing its gentle tone, replaced by a sudden, sharp gravity. Arthur quickly jumped up, his face flushing a deep, angry red. Your Honor, the boy is confused. He's just projecting because of the stress of the trial. He has an overactive imagination, he watches too many scary movies. Shut up, Arthur, Judge Miller snapped, his eyes never leaving Leo. The judge's instincts, honed by years of seeing the darkest sides of humanity, flared to life. He leaned further over the bench. Leo, look at me. Tell me exactly what you mean. Leo pointed a small, trembling finger at his father, though his voice remained chillingly calm. In the basement, Mr. Judge, in the big white freezer behind the old tools. Dad told me it was a surprise for later. But last week, when Dad was at work, I went downstairs to look for my baseball. The freezer wasn't locked properly. I opened it. The courtroom was dead silent. Even Eleanor had stopped crying, staring at her son in absolute horror. There was a little girl inside, Leo continued, his eyes filling with tears for the first time. She looked just like the pictures of the baby sister Mom told me went to live with the angels before I was born. She was wearing a pink dress, and she was very, very cold. She was sleeping in the ice. Dad told me if I ever told anyone, I would have to go sleep in the freezer with her. A collective gasp echoed through the courtroom. Arthur staggered backward, his face turning completely pale, the arrogance entirely drained from his features. He turned to run toward the heavy exit doors, but two court bailiffs, sensing the shift in the room, tackled him violently to the ground, pinning his arms behind his back. Arthur began screaming obscenities, his mask completely slipping away to reveal the monster underneath. Judge Miller's heart pounded against his ribs. He looked at the signed custody papers in front of him and, with trembling hands, tore them completely in half. He picked up his gavel and struck it down with a thunderous bang that echoed like a gunshot. Secure the father, Judge Miller roared to the officers. Call the police immediately. Dispatch an emergency forensic team to the Vance residence. Now, within minutes, the courtroom was in chaos, but amid the shouting, the sirens fading in the distance, and the struggle of a monster being dragged away in handcuffs, Eleanor ran across the room. She threw herself onto the floor, wrapping her arms around Leo, pulling him into a tight, desperate embrace. Leo finally let the tears fall, burying his face into his mother's shoulder. He was terrified, but as he felt his mother's warm, protective arms around him, he knew the nightmare was finally over. The truth was out, the dark secret in the basement was exposed, and he was finally safe.